In 30 days, I reduced my visceral fat area by 0% without stepping foot in a gym, without crash dieting, and without performing a single burpee. My waist circumference dropped from 38.4 inches to 35.1 inches. My fasting insulin fell from 14.2 IU/ml to 8.7 IU/ml. My triglycerides declined from 168 milligrams per deciliter to 112 milligrams per deciliter. And the exercise responsible for every one of those changes took me less than 35 minutes per day. My name is Dr. William Smith. I am a metabolic health researcher and physician specializing in the hormonal regulation of adipose tissue. I have spent the last 2 decades studying how specific exercise modalities interact with visceral fat at the molecular level, and what I am about to share with you is not a fitness trend. It is a clinically grounded, mechanistically understood protocol that directly targets the most dangerous fat in the human body. Visceral fat is not ordinary fat. It is not the subcutaneous fat you can pinch beneath your skin. It is fat deposited deep within the abdominal cavity, wrapped around your liver, pancreas, kidneys, and intestines. It behaves like an autonomous endocrine organ secreting inflammatory cytokines, disrupting insulin signaling, elevating cortisol, and progressively damaging your cardiovascular system. The research is unambiguous. Elevated visceral fat is independently associated with type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, dementia, and all-cause mortality, even in individuals of normal body weight. The one exercise I implemented, and the one I will walk through in complete mechanistic detail today, is Zone 2 aerobic training. And by the end of this video, I will show you precisely why it outperforms every other exercise modality for visceral fat reduction, how to implement it correctly to maximize fat oxidation, and the exact protocol I followed that produced those measurable results in 30 days. Why Zone 2 training directly targets visceral fat at the cellular level. Zone 2 training refers to aerobic exercise performed at an intensity where your body is burning fat as its primary fuel source, approximately 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. At this intensity, your working muscles are predominantly relying on oxidative phosphorylation inside the mitochondria to produce ATP, fueled primarily by free fatty acids. Here is why this matters specifically for visceral fat. Visceral adipocytes, the fat cells surrounding your abdominal organs, are metabolically distinct from subcutaneous fat cells. They are highly sensitive to catecholamine-induced lipolysis, meaning they respond aggressively to adrenaline and noradrenaline signals by releasing stored triglycerides into the bloodstream as free fatty acids and glycerol. Zone 2 exercise reliably elevates circulating catecholamines without triggering the cortisol surge associated with high-intensity exercise, and that distinction is critical. When I examined studies published in the American Journal of Physiology and the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, the data consistently showed that sustained moderate-intensity aerobic training preferentially mobilized visceral fat over subcutaneous fat. One 12-week controlled trial demonstrated that participants performing 5 sessions of 45-minute moderate aerobic exercise per week lost 17% of their visceral fat area compared to 7% in the resistance training group without any dietary changes. The molecular mechanism at work involves par-peroxisome proliferator activated receptor alpha, which is upregulated during Zone 2 training. PAR activation in liver and skeletal muscle dramatically increases the expression of genes responsible for fatty acid transport, beta oxidation, and mitochondrial biogenesis. Simultaneously, AMPK AMP-activated protein kinase is activated in response to the energy demand, which inhibits ACC, acetyl-CoA carboxylase, thereby reducing malonyl-CoA levels and removing the inhibition on CPT1, the enzyme that transports long-chain fatty acids into the mitochondrial matrix for oxidation. In practical terms, Zone 2 training activates the precise molecular switches that unlock your visceral fat stores and feed them into the energy-producing furnaces of your mitochondria. During my first 30 days, I performed 5 Zone 2 sessions per week at an average heart rate of 128 BPM sustained for 35 minutes per session. The insulin suppression window, how Zone 2 resets your fat-burning hormones. The most underappreciated benefit of Zone 2 training is its sustained effect on insulin sensitivity, which is, fundamentally, the hormonal gatekeeper of visceral fat accumulation. Insulin is the only fat storage hormone in the human body. When insulin is elevated, which occurs every time you eat carbohydrates or protein, and chronically in states of insulin resistance, lipolysis is suppressed. The enzyme hormone-sensitive lipase, HSL, which is responsible for breaking down stored triglycerides inside fat cells, is directly inhibited by insulin. Simultaneously, elevated insulin upregulates lipoprotein lipase, LPL, in adipose tissue, promoting fat uptake and storage. This is the biochemical trap that keeps visceral fat locked in place. Zone 2 training disrupts this trap through two pathways. First, during the exercise session itself, insulin levels fall as glucose uptake into muscle cells becomes insulin-independent, driven by GLUT4 transporter translocation to the cell membrane in response to AMPK activation and muscle contraction. Second, and more importantly, the effect on insulin sensitivity persists for 24 to 72 hours post-exercise. A landmark study in diabetes care demonstrated that a single 45-minute session of moderate aerobic exercise improved whole-body insulin sensitivity by 40% over the following 24 hours, an effect mediated by increased GLUT4 expression and improved mitochondrial fat oxidation capacity. Over 30 days of consistent Zone 2 training, I observed my fasting insulin decline from 14.2 to 8.7 IU/ml, and my HOMA-IR, a validated index of insulin resistance, fall from 3.1 to 1.9, well below the threshold of insulin resistance at 2.5. As insulin sensitivity improved, the hormonal environment progressively favored fat mobilization over fat storage. Each subsequent session of Zone 2 training became more metabolically productive, a positive feedback loop that accelerated visceral fat loss as the 30 days progressed. Cortisol management. The hidden reason high-intensity exercise fails to eliminate visceral fat. This is the mechanism most fitness professionals overlook entirely, and it explains why many individuals who perform intense daily exercise actually accumulate more visceral fat over time, not less. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid hormone released by the adrenal cortex in response to physiological and psychological stress. While cortisol performs essential functions in the body, chronically elevated cortisol has a specific and well-documented affinity for visceral fat accumulation. Visceral adipocytes express a significantly higher density of glucocorticoid receptors compared to subcutaneous fat cells. This means cortisol preferentially drives fat storage in the abdominal cavity. Furthermore, cortisol activates 11-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1, 1,1-beta-HSD1, within visceral adipose tissue, an enzyme that locally amplifies cortisol's fat-storing effects independent of circulating cortisol levels. High-intensity interval training, while beneficial for cardiovascular fitness, reliably produces acute cortisol spikes of 50 to 150% above baseline, particularly in individuals who are already metabolically stressed, sleep-deprived, or insulin-resistant. In those populations, repeated HIIT sessions can perpetuate the cortisol visceral fat cycle rather than break it. Zone 2 training, by contrast, produces a modest and transient cortisol response that is well within physiological norms, and the post-exercise cortisol recovery is typically complete within 60 to 90 minutes. Research published in the European Journal of Applied Physiology confirmed that 30 days of moderate-intensity aerobic training actually lowered resting cortisol levels by an average of 14% in overweight adults. My own morning cortisol measurements, taken via saliva testing, declined from 18.4 mol/L on day 1 to 14.9 mol/L by day 30. The practical implication: Zone 2 training actively dismantles the cortisol visceral fat feedback loop rather than reinforcing it. My complete 30-day protocol. Here is the exact protocol I implemented with every parameter specified. Exercise selection: brisk walking, cycling on a stationary bike, or light jogging, any activity that sustains a consistent heart rate in the Zone 2 range. I alternated between brisk walking outdoors, incline of 3 to 5%, and stationary cycling, which minimized joint stress and made it easier to maintain precise heart rate targets. Heart rate target: 60 to 70% of maximum heart rate. I calculated my maximum heart rate using the formula 208 minus 0.7 times my age, arriving at a target zone 2 range of 122 to 135 BPM. I monitored this with a chest strap heart rate monitor, which provides significantly more accurate readings than wrist-based optical sensors during steady-state exercise. Duration: 35 minutes per session. Research from the Journal of Obesity indicates that visceral fat mobilization accelerates meaningfully after the 20-minute mark of Zone 2 exercise, as glycogen stores are partially depleted and fatty acid oxidation becomes the dominant energy pathway. Frequency: 5 sessions per week, with 2 consecutive rest days. On rest days, I incorporated 20-minute post-meal walks which, though not Zone 2 in intensity, meaningfully reduce postprandial glucose and insulin spikes. Timing: I performed all Zone 2 sessions in a fasted or semi-fasted state, either first thing in the morning before breakfast or 3 to 4 hours after my last meal. Fasting amplifies catecholamine-driven lipolysis and lowers baseline insulin, creating a more favorable hormonal environment for visceral fat mobilization during exercise. A 2023 study in Cell Metabolism demonstrated that fasted-state aerobic exercise produced 20% greater fat oxidation compared to fed-state exercise at identical intensities. The talk test as a practical guide. For those without heart rate monitors, the talk test is a reliable, low-tech verification method. In Zone 2, I could carry on a conversation in full sentences, not gasping, but not entirely comfortable either. If I could sing easily, the intensity was too low. If I could not complete a sentence, I was above Zone 2. My measured results at 30 days, the results I observed over 30 consecutive days of this protocol, were both measurable and significant. Waist circumference declined from 38.4 inches to 35.1 inches, a reduction of 3.3 inches, virtually all attributable to visceral fat loss, as confirmed by DEXA estimated trunk fat reduction. Body weight declined by 4.2 pounds without any formal caloric restriction. Fasting insulin fell from 14.2 to 8.7 IU/ml. HIIT declined from 3.1 to 1.9. Fasting triglycerides, one of the most sensitive markers of visceral fat and hepatic fat content, fell from 168 milligrams per deciliter to 112 milligrams per deciliter. Resting cortisol measured 19% lower by day 30. My resting heart rate, which is an indirect measure of cardiovascular and mitochondrial efficiency, declined from 68 BPM to 61 BPM. Subjectively, my sleep quality improved markedly by week 2. My fasting blood glucose, which had been edging toward the high normal range at 102 milligrams per deciliter, came down to 93 milligrams per deciliter. My mental clarity and afternoon energy were measurably improved, consistent with research demonstrating that visceral fat reduction reduces systemic neuroinflammation and restores hypothalamic insulin sensitivity. What I have documented here is not a hypothesis. It is a measurable, mechanistically explained result achieved through a protocol grounded in peer-reviewed science. Zone 2 aerobic training activates PPARα and AMPK to directly oxidize visceral fat at the mitochondrial level. It restores insulin sensitivity through sustained GLUT4 upregulation and improved mitochondrial fat oxidation capacity. And it reduces the cortisol-driven visceral fat cycle that high-intensity training so often worsens. In 30 days, my waist declined by 3.3 inches, my fasting insulin dropped by 39%, and my triglycerides normalized, all from 35 minutes of correctly dosed aerobic exercise, 5 days per week. I am Dr. William Smith. This is what the science actually supports. If this protocol resonates with what you have been looking for, a scientifically grounded, sustainable approach to visceral fat reduction, I encourage you to take 3 actions right now. First, subscribe to this channel. I publish new evidence-based protocols on metabolic health, visceral fat, insulin resistance, and longevity on a consistent schedule. Every video is built on the same standard you have seen here: mechanisms, measurements, and reproducible protocols. Second, leave a comment below with your current waist circumference measurement and your target. I personally read these comments, and your data helps me understand which follow-up protocols would be most valuable to cover. Third, share this video with someone you care about who is struggling with visceral fat, metabolic syndrome, or stubborn belly fat. The information here is free. The impact of applying it is not. The science is clear. The protocol is accessible. The only variable remaining is implementation, and that is entirely within your control. Questions I frequently encounter. Question 1. Is 35 minutes truly sufficient, or do I need to exercise longer? Answer. Based on the research and my own data, 35 minutes at Zone 2 intensity 5 times per week is sufficient to drive meaningful visceral fat reduction within 30 days. The key variable is consistency and intensity precision. A 60-minute walk at too low an intensity is less effective than 35 minutes in confirmed Zone 2. Question 2. Can I combine Zone 2 training with resistance training? Answer 2. I did not include resistance training in my 30-day protocol in order to isolate the variable. However, the research strongly supports combining both modalities. Resistance training increases muscle mass, which raises basal metabolic rate and insulin-sensitive glucose uptake capacity. I have since integrated 2 resistance training sessions per week in my ongoing protocol and observed further improvements in insulin sensitivity. Question 3. Does diet matter alongside this protocol? Answer 3. I made no formal dietary changes during the 30 days. However, eliminating refined carbohydrates and seed oils, while increasing protein and fiber intake, would substantially accelerate the results documented here by further lowering baseline insulin and amplifying fat oxidation. Question 4. Is Zone 2 training appropriate for individuals with metabolic syndrome or obesity? Answer 4. Zone 2 training is, in my assessment, the most appropriate starting point precisely for individuals with metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, or significant visceral fat burden. The low mechanical stress, favorable hormonal profile, and direct visceral fat targeting make it ideal, and it is far safer than beginning with high-intensity protocols in a metabolically compromised state.